This is the third in a series of conversations with an international teacher of colour. The idea of these webinars is to reach out to international schools, organisations and recruitment agencies to talk about how they are making systemic changes with regards to racial equity in their institutions. So this is the third episode of Conversations with an International Teacher of Colour, and today I've got Meredith Klein with me, and I'm just going to ask you to introduce yourself, the position you have in your school, and then also a little bit of history about yourself and your story.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Dom. Right now I teach at Petersk School International, otherwise just sort of more commonly known as PSI, in Kyiv, Ukraine. And we're an IB school. And before that, I have taught in schools in the States, in Turkey, and in India. And I am part of a teaching couple with my husband, and we are both Lang and Lit teachers. So yes, lots of books.
Competitive.
Yes, a bit. I'm originally from Baltimore, which is in Maryland in the States. And I really just got the bug to not live in the States pretty early on. I was lucky enough to study abroad when I was in university, and just sort of through that experience, just knew I just needed to not be in the States for my whole adult life. So after I finished my master's degree, I left, and my now husband and I moved to Istanbul, and we were there for 4 or 5 years, and then went to India and came back to the States, and now we're here in Ukraine. And it's been really interesting. I think the first time I really realized that I felt like, at the time it was more just referred to generically as, diversity work. But I think when I really realized that was not only something that was of interest to me, but that I saw it as parallel to my role as a class teacher, was my experience working at an independent school in the States. They are similar to many international schools in that they are often, more often than not, the students come from very financially privileged backgrounds. They are often predominantly white. They are often very steeped in tradition, with lots to unpack with all those things. And I don't think I realized until I was in that role, and I was very young when I started teaching. I think I was maybe 21, 22. I just didn't realize how what I looked like and what I brought to the classroom was just sort of reciprocating and mirroring what many of those students were experiencing themselves. And it was the first time that I went to what is called the POCC, which stands for the People of Color Conference. And that is a huge national conference in the States every year that's connected with many international schools. That was just a defining experience for me, just realizing how so much of my upbringing and the color blindness of the 80s and the everybody should hold hands and be nice, how problematic that was. And it was a real reckoning for me. And so I feel like from that moment on, I've just made it a commitment to be as aware of and as continually involved in educating myself as much as I can. And I think that it still is problematic. I think every place that I've been in, what it means to be a white, cisgendered, English, quote, native English speaking teacher in the international circuit just carries a lot with that. And I just trying to be as aware of what that means in this context as possible. So that's sort of where I am.
Thank you. That's really interesting. And I know you've moved from organisation to organisation. Can you just tell me a little bit of, give me a sort of summary of how your experience has been generally, without necessarily naming the schools,
Sure, sure.
amongst the international schools that you've been in?
Sure. So in Turkey, we were at it was more of a high-ranking national school. There are a few schools in Istanbul that are technically international, but we were not one of those. We were at a national school, so 99% of the students identify or were Turkish, and they might have had the dual passport because their parents could afford that, or that was part of their family's choices, but it was a Turkish school, and I'd estimate about maybe 30 to 40% of the faculty were international, and the rest were local Turkish teachers. So there was definitely, I mean, Turkish culture is, the stereotype about it being warm and welcoming. I always found that to be true. There's a part of me that thinks I could have lived there my whole life. It was just an incredible place to be. I definitely think at the school, just because of the nature of how expat teachers tend to have much higher salaries and benefits than local teachers, that's an unavoidable conflict at so many of our schools, and that's something that I think at least I hope schools are really trying to rethink, especially in today's context of being more aware of equity and what that means. But there, because of the culture, it felt very much like I was a guest in Turkish culture, and as I should have been. I'm not there to bring my Americanness. I think that there is a part of that school culture that absolutely saw me being, white and Western as a plus, because so many of the students wanted to go to US or top UK schools. There was a connection to that I think people valued that I wouldn't have valued. But there, it was much more of a cultural environment. And I was very much not part of the dominant culture. And I loved that. I absolutely loved that. I did not feel like I was in a place where white Westernness was put on a pedestal. The Turkish culture is a very proud culture, and I really appreciated the chance to be able to be a visitor and learn from that. India, I found really complicated. In fact, I still think even years after working at that school, I'm still unpacking what it meant to be white and there. I can remember the first time my husband and I went to the grocery store, he could not find deodorant without a whitening product. And I thought, like, oh, and I had been fortunate to travel to other Southeast Asian countries. I have seen the billboards for the whitening creams and all that. And I knew from a distance it was a thing, but it was just so upsetting. I don't know how else to explain it. It was just very upsetting. My whiteness was seen as such a quote good thing, and that really bothered me. I had a DP student, a brilliant, wonderful student in my DP literature class, and it just happened to be, even though this was an international school, this particular class, all of the students were either local Indian students or what are referred to as NRIs, non-resident Indians, meaning they've lived abroad and came home.
Yeah.
So, whole classroom of brown children. And I had a brilliant student say to me, through a text we were talking about, but Miss Klein, it's just a fact that features are more attractive on lighter skin. Now, I don't think I'm ever going to forget that, because, that internalized colonial thinking is something that I know people who look like me created, and I know that people who look like me are responsible for dismantling. And it just made me feel sick, to be honest. It was because how do I pull that? It was like a little bit of self-hatred about herself, that was awful. And then I also remember in my one of my grade 6 or grade 7 classes, this was early on in the school year, I had students write me letters to introduce themselves to me, and one student described herself as fair, as in fair skinned. I would not have described this child as fair skinned. To me, I thought her skin was on the darker side. And when I asked her, we were just having conversations about why do we pick the things we do to describe ourselves? And it was for all students. She said she can describe herself as fair because there was one boy who was darker skinned. And that gave her the privilege to say, I'm fair. And so I just thought, oh my goodness, there's just, my ignorance is very apparent in this, but my responsibility is great. And so I could, the experiences I had there that centered around whiteness are just profound, and not for good reasons, but for enlightening reasons, for sure. I mean, it was definitely, I had never been somewhere where that was just vocalized as a prized characteristic. And here in Ukraine, it's interesting. At our particular school, we do certainly have some students of color, but I'm finding that there's the cultural differences and the ethnic differences are the things that are the nuances that are new to me here. So for example, what do you do when you have an Armenian student and a student from Uzbekistan or Azerbaijan in that class? So it's not to say that racial awareness isn't important. It's just, this is the first place I've been where the layer of ethnic identity is something that I'm trying to better understand.
So it's not just about color there.
Correct. And language, we're here in Ukraine. For local students, do they align more with Ukrainian language and culture? Are they more tied to Russian and Russian culture? And then you put in all of the other we have, a lot of Eastern European students at our school. Then you have all the expat kids. And so that mix is very interesting, for sure.
Yeah, I can imagine. And I'm assuming there's a layer of politics as well.
Of course. And there always is, right? And when you're that guest in the country and you're trying to you're ultimately trying to do right by everyone in your class, but what that means might be supporting a student whose identity is in an underrepresented group, or it might be bringing awareness to the dominant group. And it just sort of depends on what the context is. Finding
that balance to have that conversation in a way that will not offend, but raise awareness in some respects, isn't it?
For sure.
Okay, so I'm going to ask one of the first questions I've got here, and that is, why is your organization committed to change?
So that's a great question. I feel very fortunate that my current director has vocalized her desire for this work, and she's been very I feel really fair about recognizing that this is important and that it is meant with positive intent, but that it needs to be a commitment. And so the concept of DEI is actually one of our core values for our school right now. And our director has come out to our community to say that for her in her leadership role, this is one of her personal goals. And so I think that makes a massive difference. And I'm not saying that, everything at our school, no school is quote perfect. No school is ever finished with this. This is just a constant effort. But I have been in places where you don't have that leadership drive, and it makes a difference. I think when you have at the top someone saying this work matters to our community, we're going to commit to it, then that just brings everybody along in a little bit more of a cohesive way than if you're trying to do it grassroots, where I find that can feel really frustrating.
Yeah, I totally understand what you're saying there. And I think in our school, we have a similar sort of situation where a lot of the work is grassroots, but we have the support
Yes.
from up here, and especially our CEO, because we have 3 schools in our organization in the UK. And so we have a CEO over the 3 schools.
Oh, okay.
And he's part of our DEI council. He comes to the meetings, he's vocal and in extreme support. And we're starting on a journey. And so it sounds, in a similar sort of vein that you're in. I'm going to ask a second question. Have you actively involved all of your staff, wider community, and any initiatives to raise awareness? So we'll start off with the staff. Have you sort of engaged them actively?
Yes. So it's sort of a multifaceted thing happening with us right now. One thing I really do appreciate about where I am, and I've seen this not just with DEI work, but with other sort of initiatives that have come up along the way, other, professional development topics, is there seems to be a real interest in getting input from people who are interested first, as opposed to like a blanket, like a decree, which those can be problematic. So how this started was actually our director kind of put out an all call to secondary students, which I thought was really interesting, faculty and staff who were interested in forming sort of a general DEI committee, just like as an interest group. So that was a way to get interested staff, faculty, and students who just wanted to kind of dig in a little bit. From that, just because of the nature of, COVID and Zoom and all that, our director divided us into 2 different groups based on time availability that met, once a month to start to process at a very, very foundational level. Just what is this? What does it mean that we're going to start having more focus on DEI? What are the things that we think we're going to have to address? What are the things that we think will ultimately need to be for everyone? What are the options we want for people to have who want to go further? How is this going to impact parents? How does this impact the board? And it was very foundational. And even though I think sometimes that can feel like, oh my gosh, let's just get going with, I think it was really important because it established a cohesive group of people, including students. So having students be part of these meetings was invaluable. From these discussions and from, we sort of did a pretty intense, we responded to a bunch of survey questions about like, what does this mean? What are the needs of the school? And it was anonymous, but it was just those of us in the group. From all of that data was collected and collated, and then the leadership sort of took all of that and tried to group it into 4 or 5 key focus groups or topics, things that were going to need to get attention. So those got divided into, let me see if I can get these, creating and drafting a diversity statement for the school that becomes an official like policy level statement. Drafting, creating, and then ultimately giving out a massive school audit to all constituencies. That's going to and those questions are going to overlap with the other groups. Looking at the physical space of our school and campus. And that's not just, and that involves both access for people with disabilities and, looking at like ableism, and also physical space in terms of, like, I don't know if you've ever done like a physical, like an image audit or walk, looking at what is up in classrooms, what posters, what images, how do those things represent the physical space. School-wide curriculum and community education. So we took all of these and formed these focus groups. All of the DEI general committee members got to go with what was best for them. Each group has a facilitator, and then we created a timeline on what are the things that we can do now that are tangible and able to be completed, and what are the things that are going to be more of what's our process going to be. So in the works right now, the diversity statement group has, research samples and drafted language, and are in the process of polling for feedback about what that statement's going to be. But once that's done, that's done. That's a completable task.
This is something you're doing right now.
Yes, it is. The draft is being workshopped.
Okay, perfect. Right. Yeah.
And then the audit, that took a lot of time and effort on everyone's part, because every single group contributed questions. And then those questions were broken down based on who is going to respond to them. Is this question going to be something that has to do with, I think the youngest group that's going to respond are maybe third graders, but we're going to have upper primary have an audit. We're going to have secondary have an audit. Faculty and staff are going to have an audit, and parents, I think, are getting one. So and it is a massive undertaking. I
can imagine. And when you ask those questions, are they focused on those particular groups?
Everything. So, it's funny. I think about this just because I have two young children who are in the primary in a PYP, and, they the units that come up about how to ask good questions. And I actually had to think about that when we were drafting them, because it's like, how do you ask the question that's going to elicit the data that will help you? Mm-hmm. So how do you say objectively, who do you teach? You have to break that down into much more specific, targeted questions. So trying to phrase it, and also you don't want the questions to skew based on your own opinion or emotion. So trying to be objective about saying, do you ever learn about people who look like you or are like you in some way? And then, do you learn about people or, who look like, or who are different than you in some way, who have a different identity than you? Do you know certain terminology? Just objective. Do you know what these words mean? How frequently do your teachers bring up these topics? Like, just trying to make the questions, and I'm grossly paraphrasing, because this document is pretty massive, but it's, I think it's really, it was multiple eyes were on drafting these questions, editing these questions, and then thinking, okay, we also have to think about the fact that not everybody at our school is a native English speaker. So would this question make sense if you are new to English, or would it make sense if you're trying to think about it if you just came from a different school? Is it objective and clear enough that you're going to answer it in a way that will then tell us where, what's going well, and where, more importantly, where are the gaps? We probably think we are more diverse and inclusive than we are. Mm-hmm. And I don't think, I don't think it comes from a place of ill intent. I think it comes from how curriculum, how schools, how they function. And, it's interesting because having a lot of experience in the independent schools in the States, virtually every school has an admin level position of somebody who's director of diversity and equity or director of community life, or however it's phrased. And that is an admin position. Every school I worked in the States, I was part of a team. We interviewed candidates. We led monthly workshops. I mean, it was just a part of school culture. It was certainly not perfect. And independent schools carry their own historic burden to unpack as well. But I think that in the international circuit, it has surprised me, kind of being back in the States and coming back out again a couple of years ago, how rare it is to have a DEI coordinator and a student diversity committee and consistent PD on this. I do think that last summer was a reckoning for a lot of people. And I think when you take something like Black Lives Matter and you see people in Paris protesting about it, it's like, oh, wow, we actually have a whole lot of things that we need to address. And just because we're an international school and we say we have kids from 50 countries, that doesn't mean that we are doing the kind of equity work that our students and our faculty and staff need in order to live up to those missions that we have.
It seems like you've done a lot of work in your school, and you actually seem you seem to be on the same pathway that we are, and that's quite similar. Which is, for me, it's really reassuring because I'm thinking, wow, the only thing we haven't done is the audit, and I just love your idea about how that's happening and what you're doing and so forth. And our team thought about it, they just didn't know how to approach it. But the way you guys have approached it, I think, could be really positive and we could use ourselves. So I'm assuming you've created some goals now, along with the 4 or 5 areas that you're focusing on. Has this been inclusive collaboration with everybody, or is it just at the moment been with your committee?
So at the moment, it's just been with the committee, but so one of the other goals, one of the other focus groups with community education, we're actually about to, in a few weeks, we have 2 different external guests who are going to be doing work and offering things in different ways. Dr. Eddie Moore Jr., who started the Privilege Institute and started the White Privilege Conference, and he is going to be running 2 workshops with our school. One is going to be an evening event. It's on Zoom, so it's never, it's
not quite
never, this work is never the same when you're in the room with people, but we'll take what we can get. And his is open to anybody in the school community. So parents, board members, faculty, staff, and he's going to do a whole thing on, like equity work. And then the next day, it's a professional development day for us. And we have several options of workshops to attend. And one of his is an option for faculty as well. And it's on the connection between deep listening and equity work and how those 2 skills intersect. So that's really exciting. The other piece we have coming in is that we have another consultant from the States who is going to be working with us and doing some training just for the diversity committee in the spring. And then we'll hopefully be offering some workshops in the fall and spring of next school year that are open to everyone. So, I think it's great when you have people in your institution that have experience and that are comfortable with workshops. But there's always that risk you run of putting people off because they know you and you're their colleague. And so I think having external people come in is just, it's just rejuvenating, it inspires people. And I also think just because in our school at the moment, the people who are sort of at the core of this diversity work, who are organizing these things, we are all white. And so I think that's limiting, right? Because I'd be comfortable leading something about white allyship, but I'm not comfortable leading something about faculty of color because I don't identify that way. And so I'm not going to speak for a group to which I do not identify. That's not fair. So I think having these external consultants and experts come in, it's a win across the board. It allows people to hear real experts, real expertise, real scholarship, but outside the context of your school, so you don't feel like it's so spotlighty. It just feels like it's a reminder that this is truly just a personal commitment to be a better human being, and it's not about just, oh, our school says we have to take this workshop. It's inspiring to have these people come in.
Well, I would just, the way you explain that makes more sense, because I'm often thinking we need to focus on our school, but it's true, exactly what you're saying. This is what we need to be doing as people and in our world as well. And having an outside speaker is so important. We have had that as well. We had to sort of come back and refocus and start building from that. And I think the complication comes from having the 3 schools in the UK and trying to work across them, and making sure that each school is, so it's huge. It's not just focusing on one school,
right?
Because that would be much easier.
Do you feel like the 3 different, so I'm so interested about this. Do you feel like the 3 different schools have their own particular culture about them?
Yeah, they do. They do have their own culture. And there are, I think what we're trying to do, because we try to do things as a 3 school thing in the UK. And when we create our vision, and we have 4 pillars, so it's very similar to what you're doing, 4 pillars. And when we create that, they need to buy into this.
Okay.
Pillars, as we're calling them, and the outline of our vision is quite generic right now, because we can't specify so much because of the individual schools.
Right. I think the only sort of the positive spin on that is you have the opportunity to create a foundation that will be non-negotiable, right? Mm-hmm. So even if it does seem like it's not as progressive as you would like to be, you won't get there without having that stuff down first, right? And so just making sure that that exists so that there is a very clear message and an expectation that everyone starts here, because Absolutely. Sometimes people are resistant, unfortunately.
Absolutely, yeah, and I totally agree. And I think my battle has been, I was just writing a post on Facebook early this morning about, I feel sometimes I'm on a treadmill running really fast. I'm trying to sort of do all these different things, and I realize I need to slow down and realize the work we're doing is good, and we need to sort of take things a bit at a time. But at the same time, I'm still thinking, it's now March. We started this journey in August or June last year, rather. What have we done? Because I think people are looking for action, and it's a balancing act. And I'm sure you've sort of at your school have experienced this journey as well.
Oh, sure. And I think that's why it was one thing that was really helpful was that one of the people on the diversity committee, the DEI committee, took the 5 focus groups and created sort of a timeline for them. And the way that he designed it, it sounds like it's something so small, but just to have that visual to see, okay, so we're going to do the diversity statement and the audit, those are going to be first, because we can accomplish those tasks. But then we have curriculum and educating the community, and those are going to be more long term. And so that's more of a, that's going to be a commitment that the school makes. So as we go through those things, we'll have a better sense of how those factor into like the day to day or the year to year. How are we going to make those a part of our school culture? And then with the physical space, well, that's good. I mean, does that involve room reconfigurations? And that's a completely different kind of long-term commitment, but long-term nonetheless. Seeing it that way, just it does, I think people do feel better when they can check something off of a list, just because you feel like, okay, we did this. Like, what are the short-term things? What are the long-term things? And so I think, at least for me, because I tend to want to run before I step with this stuff, it is my nature, and that's not always a good way to go about it. That really helped me slow down and feel like, like you just said, Dom, this is going to be a process. And if anything, it is reassuring to know that I'm working somewhere that is acknowledging that in reality, this work can't just be a bunch of boxes to tick. Because then it becomes so cosmetic, right? We've all been places where cosmetic diversity just has horrendously negative repercussions. So how can we make it clear that what we're doing is actually changing the culture and the mindset, that this is just going to be ongoing human development, right? This is a decision to be mindful of this, just like I would be mindful about how I'm planning my curriculum, or how I'm trying to be a better colleague or a better friend or a better parent. I'm trying to be a better person in this vein as well. And so that just has to be part of a choice as opposed to a task. And that's helped. It's still hard, but that's helped.
Absolutely. Yeah, I totally understand what you're saying. And I think it is hard sometimes to think that we do have these structures, this is going to happen. And having that pathway and things like that. And it's forming those groups to work on particular tasks and things like that. I was actually up at I think 4 o'clock in the morning. I had all these thoughts in my head, and I thought, right, I can't sleep. So I came down, I worked an hour and started making charts and thinking, hey, we've got this group of people, where can they fit? And I've got different ideas. I thought, right, let me get all these ideas out because I can't sleep. And I put all these in, very similar to what you're talking about. And then I went back to bed and slept nicely.
But it does, though. It's in your brain, I find it really hard to put down, and that's on me. I'm not great at compartmentalizing this work, and that's sort of just a goal for myself, is how to remind myself I have my own short-term, middle grade, long-term goals for myself to be better, to do better work, and be more reflective. And it is hard to put it down. It is hard to put it down.
It is, and I think people like us who are trying to do this work, we need to be careful of burnout as well. And so, it's important to sort of know. We have our community, who both of our schools seem like everybody's stepping up, and people want to do this work, and so that's something we need to be positive about.
Absolutely.
Okay, you've already talked about consultants a little bit, and your pathways and so forth. So I think we've sort of covered quite a lot, and I know we've gone way over time. Okay, so Meredith, thank you very much for having this conversation with me. I've learned so much and had so many thoughts about so many things, and how you really align to the work that we're doing in our school, and I can take this on and sort of move forward. Thank you again.
My absolute pleasure.